In the last session, we have seen the TCP/IP model, but here we are going to see the OSI model. So you can see that lot of similarity between these both models, OSI and the TCP/IP model. If you see this set of layers, there are 7 layers. It starts with application, then it's continues with presentation, session, and this combinedly in TCP/IP model is the application layer. Then we have the transport, network, data link, and physical layer. So let's again identify what's the purpose of each of this layer. As we have seen the purpose of the TCP layer here. Also, we'll kind of understand why each of these layers are required. At the starting application, this is the service that it actually serves the software on the computer. Basically, it is the interface for the hardware or the user to interact with the application. An example of that is how you interact with any of your web services. You use HTTP or HTTPS. That's an example of protocol, how you can actually help you to interact with an application. Now next comes the presentation layer. So let's say that you are having a web page and you are actually having a set of images in that. Then there are certain format, and then there are certain image compression technology that needs to be used. So how do you present the set of data in your application? That is what is being decided in the presentation layer. The image, like the JPG, or if it is an HTML, it's not really a protocol as such, but the image format, the type of the images or the type of the file content, and there are set of protocols as well when it comes to the HTML and stuff like that. But presentation layer is the layer that basically decides how the data has to be presented and what all are the technology to be used to present that data in whichever format you want. Next comes the session layer. In the session layer, what a session layer does is it actually manages the session between the devices. Because, and we're going to see that with an example here in a while. But when the communication happens between two computers, whether from a client to the server trying to get some information, what happens is there needs to be a session, that is be a channel that needs to be established between these devices, and that is actually managed by the session layer. An example of some of the protocols are NetBIOS and RPCs. Then now, majorly from here on, from transport layer on, is the layer that you really need to know as part of the computer networking knowledge. So it starts with the transport layer, and the transport layer, what happens is you get the data which is being consumed in an application through an application needs to be made into smaller segments for you to get traversed from that server to your computer through the internet. So to make it as a segment in the transport layer, what it does is actually this data which has been presented in the presentation layer, which has been accessed through the application layer and having a session between the to an host, that data is going to be made into small chunks, or it's called as a segment in the transport layer. And a couple of purpose of this transport layer is to make sure there is a data control actually happening, which means you're actually sending the data with the amount of traffic that the network can handle, and also it does some amount of error checks as well. And there are two major protocols that we use here. One is TCP and another is UDP. Coming on to the network layer, at the network layer, what happens is these data, which is these segments that are presented in the transport layer, that get encapsulated into something called packets. At the network layer, we call this thing as the packets. To be very precise, IP packet. And what the responsibility of this network layer is to take the message end to end, so that you will be able to so that from one end host to another end host, it does route the packet all through the internet to make sure that it is actually finally reaching the destination. So that's the job of the network layer. And one of the major protocol in the network layer is IP. There are things like IPX and AppleTalk and stuff like that, but IP is a major interest, and that's something which we are going to learn. At the data link layer, these packets which contains the segments, and this segment, remember, has the data which is presented in certain format by the application, that is encapsulated or encoded into something called frames. We call it as, if it is Ethernet, we call it as Ethernet frames, but fundamentally it is called as a frame. And the purpose of this data link layer is to send this frame from one node to immediate next node. Remember, the network layer, its job is to route the traffic from the starting host all the way to the end host, and there are multiple nodes like routers, firewalls, multiple other load balancers in between. So the data link layer, what it does is, only thing that it take care of is, I'm going to send, for me to send this packet from my host to the destination, I only need to consider that who is the next guy I have to send this. That's what the data link layer does. So we'll go deeper with an example, but remember, the major one of the major protocol or technology used in this case is the Ethernet. And finally, what we, again, it's all electronics, so finally it has to convert it into bits, zeros and ones. That's how the messages are actually transmitted to the internet. And there are standards like 10 base T, 100 base T, which is the, the cable, the duplex, and the speed is what it actually meant by 10 base T. But we'll get into those details later. But do understand at the high level, at the physical layer, these are the protocols being used. Now, what we're going to do is, we're going to take one example, which is a PC trying to communicate to the server and is trying to download a web page, and then we will go through that protocol stack that we have just seen, and we will have a deep dive to understand what happens at each layer, how things are actually being served. We will do that in the very next video, and for now, um, just go back to the protocol layers of the OSI and have a clear understanding of what is the purpose of each of this layer and some of the example protocols.